So when we talk about individual inclusion, we are adding that individual, significant, and meaningful engagement to the community. Each person's unique talents adding value to oneself and to the community according to the individual needs, objectives, and choices. Individual support is provided in the natural context, and people find what is the community variable that will promote the most profound changes on themselves. The natural community settings, we have to immediate access this service, it's a model that immediate access to community resources and not have this step program where people can only reach the community when they recover or they develop some, I don't know, skills or have the permission of a professional. Is the participation in the natural settings that we allow people to recover, to obtain the necessary skills to be part of society. So also, the peer support, we know that if we want to transform the mental health system, we have to have a stronger user movement. And the experience in the pandemic allow us for people to renovate the Bill of Rights of people in Portugal, or people with lived experience, to understand that the role that we have to play is not, is not of victims, but agents of change, activists. And to the partner in crisis intervention and the promotion of community integration and recovery. Their testimonies have a leading role in defining and running mental health services. The collaborative professional support involves these mutual goals, involves the sharing of power and is a partnership. It has the orientation to recovery and community integration and promotes participation and the control to people themselves. So what have we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic? Is the reaffirmation that contextual factors have an impact on mental health. No longer mental illness can be viewed as an individual malfunction, but it's a community issue. Sorry for the... Even people with the most serious diagnosis can actively participate, assume relevant roles in a crisis situation, contributing to their well-being and the others. And we saw this when everybody thought people with lived experience with not function as citizens. People came and assumed the citizenship role and participating what was the safety measures, what was to staying at home, what was helping and supporting their own family members by going shopping or arranging or participating in the dynamics inside their home, and also promoting the well-being of other users through peer support. Collaborative and ecological support intervention that shows that professional intervention should focus on human capabilities and rights and not be focused on the deficits and on control and on in controlling decision making. We found new ways of contributing to the inclusion in society. Digital inclusion no longer, it's only necessary for people to be part of society physically and establish social diverse relations, but also is necessary like using the new technology so people can engage in society like every other member. So in conclusion, and I think I didn't overstep my time, all people have the right to live outside in institutions and independently to participate and be included in community. And it's by acquiring the value social roles, expand the social network, and access significant resources in the community that is possible to strengthen this citizenship status that will promote well-being, recovery, and overcome discrimination. On an organization level, mental health service should implement a multidimensional and multi-level intervention. Identify and enhance collaborative with users, individual, family, social, and community factors and resources present in people's life in order to maintain and increase the quality of life, linking and supporting individuals in their natural community settings, overcoming the physical and stigmatized barriers. And by physical, we mean the walls that raised in psychiatric institutions, but also the walls that exist in the trans-institutionalization. At system level, we have learned that from the pandemic, mental health problems are not individual, but of the community, and we all can support and help to make it better. And the diversity will create stronger communities. At the time, we live in a very high consumption of medication and new forms of institutionalization. It's necessary to add to the climate concern, the concern for human ecology, to get healthier and stronger communities. I'll leave the information for Professor Zonello's last lesson, so everybody wants to participate can send an email or talk to me in the end, and I'll make sure you can watch it. Thank you very much.
Please, I don't know if someone wants to ask some. Please, are you going to open for questions or not? Can you, your microphone, please?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Luis, for a wonderful talk on the big picture that surrounds the good work that you and Josie are doing, and many others, I'm sure, are doing in Lisbon and around Portugal and Europe as well. We have time for a few questions. If people would like to ask, please unmute yourself and speak up.
Does anybody have any question here or comment?
So. Going once, going twice. Okay, well, keep thinking. We'll have other chances to ask questions later. Next is a study from Martina Melhakova, Annie Wegerson, and myself. That builds on the great work of Jose and others, and focuses in on a particular program and reports some of our findings from a national study of living room programs. It's called Centering Peers in Responding to Mental Health Crises, the Living Room Example. Next slide, Martina. A centerpiece of this program is peer support, and relatedly the valuing of lived experience with mental illness. Next slide, Martina. When we talk about peer support, of course, we're talking about peers offering support, sharing their personal experiences, and in that process, conveying both a sense of hope and a sense of universality. That is to say that other people have gone through the trials and tribulations of mental illness and have worked those through and learned to live with the mental illness or to move beyond it. In the United States, there's a growing interest in the role of peers as part of mental health reform, while community psychologists demonstrated 40 and 50 years ago the value of paraprofessionals in mental health. It's only in recent years that peers have been seen as a valuable resource and now are a key aspect of recovery-oriented care. As a result, we're seeing an increase in funded positions for people with lived experience working in the mental health system in the United States, which is very exciting. So, I'll turn it over to Martina.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what led to the development of these living room programs that we're going to be talking about, which are peer-led. So there's been kind of various factors that contributed to this development, some of which Chris has already kind of touched upon, which has been kind of this decrease in funding for community mental health services, which kind of had a domino effect on access. And when individuals in crisis, in mental health crisis, have nowhere to go to seek care in a community setting, they may then rely on emergency services or not really get care at all. So really it kind of led to this influx of overcrowding in emergency rooms in the States, and kind of high demand on staff with limited resources, kind of staff feeling rushed to individuals seeking care, and really inability to fully provide intervention. So a lot of the focus in emergency rooms would be on assessment rather than really intervention. And in turn, clients would experience staff as rushed, and others even noting kind of more significant concerns that kind of point to emergency rooms not being recovery oriented in a mental health crisis. So for example, clients noting that they felt re-traumatized, like by having to strip to gowns and things of that nature. And so those are some of the kind of factors that led to folks wanting to develop kind of an innovative model, which is the living room program. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that next. All right. So living room programs are peer-led crisis mental health services that are delivered in a home-like setting. So that's why they are called living rooms. It's supposed to be a space that is alternative to the traditional kind of service of going to an emergency room that can kind of feel cold and sterile. And so it's supposed to be kind of like you sit down on a couch, maybe have some coffee, or kind of welcomed and invited. And oftentimes that person welcoming and inviting you is a peer specialist, somebody with lived experience of mental health issues, mental health crises, and things of that nature. So the goals of these services have included reducing emergency room use, and of course, increasing well-being and integration, so that folks can reach their own goals, whatever goals that those may be, increasing service availability, because a lot of the factors that led to this is lack of services and lack of connections to care, and also providing recovery-oriented care. So really trying to be kind of responsive to the experiences that folks have had in traditional care when in mental health crisis. And there has been limited research on these programs that are kind of cropping up all over the States. And so we wanted to kind of conduct a study of these programs to kind of see how they are developed and implemented. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the study is before I turn it over to Annie for results. So what we did was a qualitative study. So we ended up interviewing just program leaders across 12 different programs. So we identified folks based on just Google searches, like if a program had a website, or maybe like programs knew of each other. So a little bit of snowball recruitment, things of that nature, just to kind of get some participants. And we identified various programs and then contacted them. And then if they consented, they participated in our study. And we prioritized program leaders, although down the line, it would be great to interview, the peers themselves, or if they were not a program leader, or, guests, of course, as well. So we did 90-minute interviews with 12 program leaders, and we also went into these programs, 4 of these programs. So the data was collected before the COVID pandemic. I should note that's pretty important. And we were able to kind of enter the physical space of 4 of these programs, and 2 were kind of, by video, and 2 were in person because of kind of location. And then we also collected some artifacts. So if they had program manuals and things of that nature that they were willing to share with us, so that we can kind of get a sense of their kind of approach and philosophy to their program as well. We used thematic analysis, so we in vivo, so we kind of developed themes by consensus, and then we use those themes to code the data, and we kind of got inter-rated reliability via Kappa for that. We do have some sample interview guide questions on the slide as well, if you're interested in that. And in the rest of the presentation, we're going to kind of hone in on specific types of themes that we identified. kind of relevant to the centrality of peers, of the peer intervention, the peer piece, because that is a kind of a key component of this intervention. And I will go ahead and turn it over to, oh no, I'm sorry, I have one more slide on participant demographics, so I'll just quickly review that. So these are the participants that participated. We have age, race, ethnicity, gender, level of education, time employed in any role within the living room program, and length of program operation. So you can see that there's kind of a wide range of length of operation for these programs that we were able to recruit to the study. And primarily, you can also see that it's highly educated white women in these roles that we interviewed. So like I mentioned, hopefully for future work, we also want to kind of diversify and interview with peers and guests in terms of this work. We had a mix of urban and suburban programs, and 11 of 12 were operational at the time. So one program had dissolved by the time we talked to the program leader. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amy for results.
Thanks, Martina. You can actually skip to the next slide too. So our interviews with program leaders have resulted in a lot of different themes around living room programs. And for today, I wanted to highlight 4 key themes that were relevant to the utility, roles, and benefits of peer support staff. For the sake of time, I'll touch on each of these, but if anyone has additional questions, feel free to ask us at the end too. You can go ahead, Martina. Okay, so to provide some ecological context, our program leaders had discussed the community's need for peer-driven services, and then also how they integrated these services into their communities. So some of the characteristics within the community that led to program development included the lack of peer-staffed or strengths-based mental health crisis services, as well as individuals' negative experiences with more traditional services that hadn't had peers, like going to a hospital emergency room. So in kind of recognizing this need and then developing, living room programs had engaged with their community through things like raising awareness by inviting community members or organizations in for tours, and then also building ongoing collaborative relationships with other stakeholders like mental health, other mental health providers, police, things of that nature. So in discussing their community context, one program leader had shared that their area really struggles with access to resources, and not just mental health resources, but to food, to health, to a lot of basic needs. There's a lot of exposure to trauma, there's food deserts, there's a high crime area, and social systems that don't support change and the opportunity for making positive changes in people's lives. We're trying to be out here in a place where there's likely more mental health crises and a lot more things going on. So you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So we had also looked at and heard from program leaders about what makes a living room and like what are the key components of a living room. And of course, one of the main parts of the living room themselves is having that peer support and someone with lived experience who could connect with guests and offer support and hope. Other elements included having a welcoming and non-clinical environment, kind of like what Martina had discussed at the beginning of like making it a living room space. Also preventing crises while also emphasizing guest choice and strengths too, and then trying to minimize low barriers or minimizing any sort of barriers to make services more accessible was the key parts of a living room. So to highlight that peer support as a key element of the living room's work and really focusing on how they can provide hope for recovery and guests, one participant had shared that being someone who's living well in recovery when you may be facing some challenges gives a lot of hope for what guests can achieve in the future. Hopelessness is a very predominant belief system that comes along with a lot of different mental health diagnoses. So we can give them space that you can see someone who says, oh, I'm diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and you see this individual who's living a healthy and positive kind of life. And that's really helpful for the guests. We have people saying, I want to be where you are this time next year, and knowing that that's possible. So kind of instilling that hope piece. So you can go to the next slide. Thanks. And then in addition to the conceptual values of peers, leaders had also discussed some of the tangible elements of like having peer support in these spaces, starting with just the training and hiring of peers. So when hiring peers, programs looked for individuals who, of course, had some sort of lived experience, which could be defined as either having interacted themselves with the mental health system, having a family history of mental health issues, or being a caregiver to someone who had mental health issues. So kind of varied a little bit. They were pretty low barrier with professional background, but typically sought someone who had a high school degree. And some programs had expressed wanting people who had special certification as a certified recovery support specialist, or the ability to obtain that certification within a certain time frame. So that kind of leads us to training too. Programs had sought to offer a variety of different training on topics like trauma-informed peer support, human rights, peer support for specific populations. But a key element was teaching peers how to utilize their lived experience with appropriate disclosure for guests to instill that hope, but also not overwhelm them too with like their own story. So you can go ahead and skip. You can go to the next slide, Martina. Thanks. So one program leader had shared, oh, sorry. Would you mind going back? Thank you. Yeah, I think my computer froze. But the peers had been told in their training that if someone comes in with depression and the peer has been diagnosed and treated for depression, the peer can disclose that, yes, I understand what you're going through. I've been through that before. It's really difficult, but that boundaries are also spoken to with the peers. And then the last piece is just the peer role. So for the sake of time, I'll touch on this briefly too. But when a guest arrives, both a peer and a mental health clinician can offer support, like providing assessment and paperwork, meeting basic needs like offering refreshments to welcome them in. But these key pieces of the peer role is to provide emotional support, like welcoming someone into the space, working on skill building, like setting different goals, and then offering referrals and care continuity to connect them to resources in the environment. So just as a brief example, this program leader had shared the role of the peer specialist as partnering with individuals to help with whatever they need, working a lot on coping skills, mindfulness meditation, worksheets, hanging out with them, doing an activity to decrease their stress levels, and really just partnering with them throughout their stay. So I'll hand it over to Chris to wrap us up.
Okay. So what are the implications of this work? One thing that's fundamental here is the centrality of peers and lived experience, seeing lived experience as an asset, not a liability. It's a big attitude shift, and fortunately attitudes are malleable. And when we think about reversals, taking what is widely seen as a weakness or a problem and turning it into a strength or a benefit, we also think of phrases like "Black is beautiful" in the 60s that was integral to the pivoting of race and seeing being a member of a underrepresented group or a group that had been cast aside by mainstream society in a positive light. Sisterhood is powerful as a term in the women's movement, as very strong. People with disabilities have promoted, some have promoted disability first language that forces others to address the disability and see it in a they hope in a more positive light. And I'm reminded of the Billy Joel song, "You may be right, I may be crazy, but it just might be a lunatic you're looking for." I like that one. This also shows the value of physical environment on mental health and the value of recovery-oriented care, looking at things ecologically and recognizing that one size doesn't fit all, context matters. And so there is diversity among programs and relationships to institutions like police. Some programs finding police to be intrusive and problematic, others finding them to be a valuable referral source. So next slide, please.
Sorry, so you enter in this session.
So I think here we see that there's an important balance between program structure and flexibility in order to deal with the wide range of issues that come up, not only mental health crises per se, but also housing, education, jobs, family. The access with low barriers is fundamental here, as are, of course, having a welcoming environment and peer support, building relationships within the community and within the home agency is fundamental and is not part of the role that clinicians and peers are usually trained for, but needs to be attended to going forward. So here we see an intervention that helps reconnect community psychology to mental health and mental illness, which was where community psychology started, at least in the United States in the 1960s. And we hope that we can continue that relationship and build on it. At this time, some states in the United States are funding living room programs. So the number of programs is increasing. The new 988 phone number for mental health crises, similar to 911 for crises of all sorts, is mandating that peers be involved in response teams going out to address mental health crises in the community, and certified community behavioral health centers also are being mandated by the federal government to include peers in as service providers. So there's a lot of movement in a direction that living room programs are pioneering, and it will be exciting over the next few years, especially if the national administration is favorably inclined to see this progress.
Sorry, before you finish, I have so you enter in the Naples in-person problems. Is there someone who has to collect his ticket for San Carlo this evening? If you come and you collect it now, you collect it. You're fine. Okay.
Okay.
Chris, can you keep going?
Okay, so that's our talk. If
It's
there are
okay.
any, if there are any questions,
April.
please. I don't know that we have. I think we went over a little bit. So, any quick questions? We'd be glad to field those.
He is asking for questions between presentations.
Okay. Hearing no questions, let's move on to Brett's presentation, which concerns transformational education in clinical psychology.
Hello, can I check and see how much time we have left? I want to be sure that there's time for our discussant, and I can adjust as needed.
Yeah, I would say if you can go for 12 or 13 minutes, that would be good.
Okay, and I've got a timer here, but if people notice that I'm not paying attention to the timer, feel free to let me know there are 5 or 2 minutes. And if I can make one other request, in terms of the sound in Napoli, or if I speak too quickly, please interrupt me. Also, I want to be sure that I am clear and people understand.
Okay.
So this is a discussion about trying to think about how we support training of people interested in transformative change in mental health. And I think the two presentations beforehand were wonderful examples of what we can do. I suspect that they come about in part because of individuals and their values, and that's an important part of the process. But in terms of training models, in terms of planning for sustainability of this perspective, centering on experience of consumers or users, thinking about systems level change, that is important. So that's where I begin. And I just want to note that there has been a movement within community psychology to think about transformative change in mental health. And this is developed over many conferences, and the international conferences have been instrumental in having discussions related to this. There have been products like a book, an SCRA book series, a special issue of the American Journal of Community Psychology, and there is an ongoing interest group. So if people are interested in connecting, please connect with any of the presenters, and we can talk with you. That transformative change in mental health was initiated to think about change, what community psychology could do better than it's had. But a lot of this discussion is focused on clinical training programs, in part because of my experience, and that's where I've been spending time. And, the presenters from DePaul University have a similar program. At ICPA in Lisboa, there are many similar strands, but the focus on mental health needs will vary by country, we acknowledge, and mental health systems are quite different. But the opportunity to think about centering on user experience and making organizational changes like IEPs that Luis talked about today, thinking about developing new services that are recovery focused, like the Living Room Project, but locality-based initiatives where we're developing opportunities for employment, not in shelters, but in employment settings, and thinking about large-scale policy like Housing First in Canada. Their community psychology colleagues have been instrumental in that movement. European Union in terms of Housing First policy and centering on the experience of people who don't have homes, but also have many of whom have lived experience of mental health problems. One thing that's been missing in our discussions, I was thinking about how do we train and support future mental health workers, but also policymakers, mental health service users, and advocates. And so this is meant to be a beginning discussion of that. By no means is it meant to be a model or an exemplar. So this is a simplified presentation of what might happen when we are having problems and how we develop services to intervene for crises or crisis management or clinical intervention. Many of the outcomes, if you look on the far right, are focused on preventing or avoiding or minimizing distress, dysfunction, or clinical disorders. And transformative change tries to expand how we think about outcomes, and you had good examples of that already today. In terms of thinking about a phenomena that might be addressed that could be stressors, what are the structural factors that might be more remote or distal to everyday experience out of awareness, but the accumulation of stressors had an overwhelming impact on one's well-being and health. The transformative change in mental health requires an expansion of intervention and conceptual skills, understanding the problems and the kinds of skills that it would take to persuade a system to have a living room project and make referrals, or with IEPs to build relationships in community settings that are outside of a clinic or hospital. I think transformative change also would require, in terms of training, an integration of skills. Many of our training models operate independent of each other, and having dialogue and hopefully fruitful solutions to issues where you blend community psychology-like skills and clinical skills would be important. And finally, emphasizing collaborative partnerships with mental health service users, but also with community members, and in any of the interventions centering initiatives on experience and the participation of mental health service users. So we could expand this model that I showed beforehand, and on the far left side, you see distal contextual factors or distal personal factors that might be something we would address with policy skills and advocating, community organizing, creating alternative settings like IEPs. Or in terms of stress reactions or proximal stressors, intentionally and systematically promoting mental health promotion, prevention programs, and mutual help like the Living Room Project, and creating that as part of a system of care alternative would be essential. So again, the question would be, what skills would we need to train future workers, advocates, and users to engage in these activities? There's often, historically, new models of training have led to, or new needs, new perspectives have led to discussions about how to develop new models of training. That is part of the history of the development of community psychology within the United States, North America, and in many countries. There are currently two tensions that are perhaps balanced, but are challenging. In that, in terms of community psychology competency, the SCRA Practice Council is one example in terms of thinking about what are community psychology competencies and intervention skills. I think is a resource for thinking about training models, and they've developed a number of resources. Within the context of North America, the American Psychological Association, the Canadian Psychological Association have accreditation processes for training programs where they stipulate minimum levels of competence and particular curricula that have to be addressed. Not surprisingly, they don't include many opportunities to think about transformative change. However, there may be a possibility, there's a revised model that is looking at consultation. And I think there's an opportunity for us to be influential as they try to expand how they understand what is appropriate community psychology or clinical psychology intervention. What are we talking about to be concrete? Community organizing, coalition building skills to gather resources, and IEPs, I'm sure Luis could talk about examples of that. Group process related skills rather than only individual intervention or assessment. Community development, consultation and capacity building of organizations. Program development, focusing on implementation of programs and evaluation. Research and policy and creating alternative settings like the Living Room Project or like IEPs are skills usually outside the experience of people that have classic one-to-one clinical psychology training. I just want to note that I'll be talking primarily about my experience at the University of South Carolina, but the presenters today have experience. There are over 20 programs in the US and Canada, some of whom might identify as a clinical community training program, some of whom might have a track or faculty that are interested in that. ISHPA in Portugal and IEPs, they work with a different mental health system than is often developed in the US and Canada. But I think there's fruitful dialogue in terms of training, and I know that there are many examples from Portugal that are helpful here too. I look forward to dialogue. I do want to note that there is a paradox in thinking about clinical community psychology. There are histories of over 50 years. Chris talked a bit about that in terms of paraprofessionals and mutual health. But there was a study released in 2020 by colleagues in Italy, noting that there's not very much written about clinical perspectives and community perspectives intervened recently. And it may be surprising, maybe it's worth just noting this and thinking about how we need to promote the visibility of these training models and the work that we're doing involving both clinical and community perspectives. So at the University of South Carolina, we've had a clinical psychology program since 1964, and I just want to note that it was funded by the National Institute of Mental Health to get started, like many clinical psych programs. In 1964, there was only one clinical psychologist in the state of South Carolina. But fairly soon after being established in the late 60s, a clinical and community emphasis was of interest, and the first graduate with that emphasis was 1971. Currently, we have 40 students and 19 faculty. We have over 270 people apply to participate in the program each year. We can only accept 7 to 9. We are accredited by the clinical psychology from the American Psychological Association, but we don't use that as our defining focus. So we try to think about integrating clinical and community approaches. You can see that we center on a systems perspective. We consider multiple points of interventions. Thank you, Chris. We require intervention skills is part of what people do. And we require a community psychology class in the first semester. And then people can choose electives in terms of particular skills that they want to do. In the interest of time, let me skip these slides and talk just a bit about surveying our alumni. So our alumni graduate with a clinical psychology degree, and we asked them, this is 2 to 10 years after graduation, what work they're doing, where they're doing the work. And you can see some of these skills are critical to what people have done. I believe the total number of responses are in low 20s here in terms of, I'm sorry, 38 people respond. So you can see that there's a range of skills that people have used. If we ask people what they're doing with their work, on average, less than a third is clinical practice. A large amount is research. 15% is community psych practice. Within that, there's some people who their entire practice is community psychology focused skills, and others that might spend 10% of their time on that. In terms of, are we effective or not, expanding clinical practice, it was a common response. Engaging and thinking about outreach is a common response, but that really doesn't meet the goals of transformative change in terms of centering on the experience of consumers and focusing on systems change. They're helpful. We would want to see that word. We did have a number of folks think about developing organizations to support health outcomes, and in particular, health equity and community organizing, coalition building, organizational consulting. We did have people talk about changing interventions and scopes along the lines of what was described today. And people preparing for collaboration. So a clinical community model, I think, has some contributions to trying to develop a model focusing on transformative change. There are many students that are interested in doing something more than just clinical psych, and I think the social needs that students now, the Generation Z students see, is not so acceptable or not compatible with their goals and values to only focus on clinical settings. And I list some other advantages there too, that there's some problems with the clinical community training model too, or at least limitations, in that choice and flexibility of how to integrate perspectives can lead to incomplete experiences for students. We had some students that got very little community psychology training because they wanted to focus on assessment, and later got into work settings and realized that they needed to develop more consultation skills than they took advantage of at the time. They had to make choices about where to spend their time and what activities they're involved in. It's also difficult to persuade established faculty members in a clinical program that they should do something different. This is probably not unusual for most of our work. But I did want to just present this slide. I see them at time, but I'm curious to think with people about how we promote models of training for transformative change. And I'll let that stand there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brett. That was a very great overview of clinical community training, its value and issues.
Yes. Very good.
Yeah. Are there any questions before we go to our discussant?
I will take, what, now it's, loro mi vedono mentre io parlo. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, to both those. So I'm happy
Both. Perfect. Okay. So I'm here. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you. You means you all, Jose, Chris, Brett, for inviting me, Luis, so Martina, Annie, and so on, for inviting me to be the discussant of this very interesting symposium. We have learned, we have here the presentation of three important innovative interventions. Well, now we have to discuss a bit in what is exactly the innovation in this, in what you have presented. Anyway, I think that the problem that we have is that we agree, I think that we all, you and me, and the people perhaps is in this room, we agree on the theoretical framework that you presented. So because we have taken a position, we took position in favor of the transformative change. And it's a lot of years that we are talking about that the transformative model has to prevail on the ameliorative model. So like Prileltensky said, and so on. So we agree on this theoretical level. But what I've noticed is that the traditional model, the biomedical model, is still alive. We don't forget this. And it is strong, is a very strong model. And even in my country, that is Italy, Italy is one of the countries in which the institutionalization took place with Basaglia. We have a national law, one of the first national law who decided the institutionalization. Well, after 40 years, the biomedical model is still there. And is not still there. The problem, the worry is that it's a model that is very appreciated by the psychiatrists working in the local and health services in Italy. So one point is that there are differences. The US has is a particular has different context anyway inside the US, but Europe is different. And also inside Europe, there are different countries. And also in each country, there is differences, for example, in Italy among the North and the South. So it's really a fragmented context on the mental health issue. So said, I have some general comments for all you three presentation and then some specific question. The general question, the general comments is, well, the first question that went to my mind and concern the problem of sustainability. That is, how sustainable are the models that you propose, the innovation, the intervention that you propose? The sustainability means over time. And this, I think this is one of the problems that all the innovation have to face and to solve in a sense. The second general question concerns the impact, not just the results, because there are results, there are immediate results, but what about the outcome? What about the impact of this innovation on the different partners, that is on the users first, on the organization of the services, on the more general system, and how it's possible to assess, to evaluate this impact, the outcome. Because I think that is only, well, perhaps it's stronger, but I think that is only with, if we present these outcomes, that is possible to persuade, for example, the policymaker. Because one of our interlocutors has to be the policymakers, the governance of the system of the local and health services. And to talk with them, that is a thing that I'm doing every day, it's very difficult to change the position if you have not some very concrete, not only result, but also the impact. In what sense the situation has changed, is really changed, or, well, this is one problem. And the third point is that we have to lobby, to contact the policymaker, but before we have to lobby, to persuade what Brett said just at the end, that is the colleagues, the staff, the faculty, the other psychologists. And this is a really important point. The other psychologists and also the other professionals. One of the challenges that we are now facing, at least in Italy, is that we talk since years about the integration of health professional and social professional. Where is psychology situated? Psychology is a health profession or is a social profession? Now we had in Italy a law that decided that psychologist is a health profession, but is not really true, is not really shared by everyone, because there are many other fields in which the psychologists work that are not really sanitary. So this is, I don't know if also in your country is this kind of problem. As to specific question to Chris, Martina, and Annie, about the peer support. I didn't know before the living room experience, and I think it's very interesting. And I'm very happy to learn about this. I'm now focused on the peer support, because also in my country, also in Italy, we have this figure, this role. We called ESP, that is expert by experience, and they are faced with the expert by profession. So in a team, we have the expert by experience and the expert by profession. That is the confrontation of two kinds of knowledge and of knowledge. That is an experiential knowledge, the peer, and the professional knowledge. So two kinds of expertise. But there are some problem, and I would like to know if this problem, if you also encounter this kind of problem. One problem is the problem of power, because they are in the same team, but the power is in the hand of the professional, not of the peer. And so there is not an horizontal relationship, is still a vertical relationship. Another point is a paid work, those of the peer, or is volunteering? Because this also makes some differences. The third point is that if their role, the role of the peer, is formally, officially recognized or not, or is just a sort of voluntary help that they give. These are questions that are now debated in Italy, because the figure, the role of the expert by experience is not formally recognized, is not paid, and this creates also is a point of discussion. We had a national conference, a regional and a national conference about this role and what is possible to do in order to have this role more recognized and more valued. So this for Chris. For Brett, about the clinical community program. Well, I'm really in favor of that, Brett, but my personal experience, I teach, well, now some years ago, community psychology in a master for clinical psychology. And the first reaction that I have was from my colleague who said, why to have a course on community psychology in a master of clinical psychology? What does matter? And also reaction from the students. Why we have to learn about community psychology if we are clinician? No? So at that time, I had the possibility to insert the community psychology course, because at that time I was the dean of the faculty. So I said, well, we will have the community psychology course in the clinical master, in the master for the clinic, and then this continue. But you know, you have really to persuade the colleagues, the staff, that is important that even the clinician has to learn about the community psychology, but it's not so easy. It's not so easy. And even in the data that you presented, Brett, about the activity of your alumni, the 19 out of 40, if I correct understood, they continue to make psychotherapy, whereas only 12 make prevention. So there is still a hierarchy. Huh? First, another point is that even in Italy, we have now a national law that has defined some services as called community house. And this is a new name given to what first was called health house, Casa della Salute, health house. Now, with a law, they will be called community house. What does it mean? Because the first idea is that, well, it's community house, and so in that it is the community psychologist who has to work in a community house. Well, we find the opposition of our colleague. We said, no, it's not the case. They are the clinical psychologist who has to work in that because it is a health profession and so on and so on. So it's still a matter of discussion. So I think that we have to deepen if the idea, the model, the theory, the ecological collaborative model is recognized by us as important, but we have to deepen and to clarify the concept and the methods, and then to try to persuade the politician, the policymaker, and the colleague. And well, I have also a question for José. I will find the question. What is for José? I know it's concerned just the sustain. No. I have a problem. I have a question for you, but I've already raised the question to you, José, in our previous talk. About you said that what is Louise said that was important is the user movement. It's the fact that the users will take the floor and will speak for themselves. Now, what seems to happen, at least in Europe, is a declining of the user movement. Why? What happens? So that's all for the moment.
Hello, Chris. Can I
Please,
say something?
Just go right ahead.
I would like to start with about the impact and the outcomes
Sure.
I strongly think that after the COVID, as Luis mentioned, we can reduce or increase the awareness of the people about the institutionalization consequence and the negative impact. So there is a very good momentum to criticize and to change the institution that still exists, not only in the mental health field, but also for the elderly, for the disabled people, for children. So to generalize this criticism, can be a very good impact, an outcome of our work. The second impact, it's about the new perspective of intervening, not in a biomedic organicist way, a neuroscience. I'm very concerned about the new neurosurgeons. Doctors, they are going back to do some brain interventions for the mentally ill and coming back. And now we can, with our work, to improve the perspective of the social variables that can help people in general, not only the mentally ill. I'm not only concerned about this specifically, but in general, how important is the social support, how important it's caring to each other, how important it's to improve what we can learn with the peers movement and the mental health groups movement to spill over to the general communities. I think we are living at a special moment now that we can improve our communities to for promotion of the mental health. This can be a very important, because we have learned so much about how important is the social variables, not to be afraid of talking about them, not to be ashamed to say that we believe in the social impact. Because it's interesting, the COVID, when people were analyzing the COVID, everybody during the COVID was social perspective. How bad is the confinement? How bad it's the masks for communication? How bad children and youth not going to the schools for their results? So everybody was social. And after the COVID, now everybody is sending people to psychological support and to medication and some institutionalization. I'm very concerned, and this is something that we can initiate a global movement like climate change for the criticism of the generalization of medication for the mental health issues. So there are many things that we learn with the COVID, and now people are more sensitive. In my lesson, it's about this that I'm going to talk. And I hope that is going to start a new movement against organicism and medication and we have to stop the psychopathologization of the daily living, the daily living. What we feel, it's normal things. Melancholy, it's a normal state of mind. It's not depression. And anxiety, it's normal in the confinement times. So we have to normalize the suffering of human being and to protect people not being medicalized and institutionalized. That is what I want to say for now. And maybe unfortunately, I'm not going to be until the end because I have to leave, but I'm going to listen your interventions through the record.
Okay, the message of hope.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. So, Brett, do you want to respond to Bruno's good questions concerning your session or the broader questions?
A brief response. I think I've noticed that many people who dedicated their careers to addressing suffering and have worked in more of a clinical setting, almost all of them, as they get toward the end of their career, realize the limits of an individual level of analysis and focus, and they try to promote policy in different ways. Policy around eating disorders and food and diet, policy around trauma, policy around access to care or promotion of care. And it seems like, you know, we can learn from that and think about training and institute some and address some of the challenges that Bruna raised. I think comments were very, very helpful in that our training models need to think about how we persuade colleagues and others, and that's a skill. And not everybody would need to have that skill, but a number of people would need to do that. And I recall hearing from some elders in the field when I was entering that you need to be at the table to create opportunities and promote opportunities. And so as dean of the faculty, it sounds like you had that opportunity. I volunteered to be the director of our training program for 5 or 6 years, and that was part of the opportunity to make sure that a community psychology perspective continued. We used to have more clinical community programs, both for internship training, but for graduate programs, but they've reduced. I think a number of reasons. The power of the biomedical approach in the settings that are controlled and the way the resources are worked that will continue. We have to acknowledge that and intervene, join in some ways to be at the table, but then to advocate for a different perspective. It's an interesting balance of being an insider and being an outsider to promote the change. So I very much welcome the comments. I'm curious, is Martina or Annie or others that are Luis that are newer in their careers entering the table, whether entering the field rather, whether this wisdom is something that you feel like you have a place to address at this point. But Bruna's comments and about our survival of our perspective and to be able to live into Jose's optimistic view of the future, I think requires this kind of behind the scenes commitment and work that often is not published or often is not presented.
Martina or Annie, do you have a thought about the sort of the status of clinical and community psych? No. Yeah, I would say it's an ongoing issue and has been for decades. I think we've been fortunate at DePaul to have had community psychologists at the founding of the program that gave the program that dimension, and it's become kind of an accepted part of not only the clinical community program, but also the clinical child program to a lesser extent, but still present. And in the last 20 years, being able to start a freestanding community program, I think just helps enhance that. But at UIC, one of my pains was that while I was department chair and theoretically should have been able to do something about it, I wasn't active in the clinical community program there because of my chair duties. And having started that program 30 years previous, it went out of business while I was chair. So it really came to sort of where the energy was on the part of the faculty, and it was for the community clinical faculty, it was about the freestanding community program, and the other clinical faculty were not, committed one way or the other, really. So it closed down. So, yeah. We have about 2 minutes before we close. Does anyone want to address any of the other questions that Bruna made, or ask a question from the audience? I see a hand. Sort of an unconnected hand being
Yes,
raised.
there is a question from the audience.
Good. Go for it.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Chris. Hi, Brett. It's Gina Langhout. Nice. Thank you.
Oh,
and
hi,
I'm-
Gina. Good to have
Hi.
you with us.
Thank you for the panel. I have a sort of a broad question and then maybe a specific one as well. So I am working with some young people on a youth participatory action research project, and they have identified mental health as an issue that they would like to focus on for this upcoming year. They are meaning this much more broadly than what this panel has talked about. So they're talking about everything from women of color who are interested in surfing, being sort of pushed out of that, and what that means for their own mental health in terms of their relationship to the water, to the land. They're talking about things like immigration raids and how when they happen in our community, there's no conversation about it afterward at schools or in any other spaces. So they're really thinking broadly about this, and we're going to be engaging in some kind of action around it. So I'm curious on one level to hear if you think that these living room program models would be helpful sort of more broadly than, you know, somebody who is in crisis. And then on the training piece, what kind of training you think might be needed? And maybe this one is the specific, well, I'll ask it broadly and then I have a specific question for Brett. Do you think that clinical community programs or other kinds of training programs for peers can be nimble enough to address all of the, you know, the myriad of problems that seem to be happening even faster and faster that, you know, young people and I think others are experiencing, whether it be around global climate change and the anxieties around that, and, you know, really funneling them into action as well. And then maybe this is the specific one for Brett. When you're talking about advocacy and organizing, do you envision any pushback from the state that you are in? You know, because I can imagine that there will be many more people who would like support around whether it be, you know, the loss of human rights for women, for people who are trans. And if your program really was moving in the direction of training clinical community psychologists in advocacy and action, would you receive pushback from the state, or have you gotten any wins of that yet? Sorry for the long question.
Good ones. Brett, do you want to tackle that?
Sure, maybe I'll respond quickly to at least as a first thought to the broader question in terms of whether training can be nimble for all the pressing needs that are arising. You know, I think if training programs can center on people's experience and think about collaboration and think about change at different levels of analysis, those skills, if that's a part of a recognized set of skills that people have, consultation, community organizing, advocacy, that could help. That'd be better prepared than what we have now. You know, the specific needs, I think, will require commitment and time and learning and relationship building. So would think that no training model would be able to do that in the abstract, but over time and commitments to issues can develop particular skills. For people that aren't aware, South Carolina is in the southeastern part of the U.S. It's politically and culturally conservative, although there's more diversity within the state than is portrayed in national media. There are a number of initiatives, and so part of Gina, a response in terms of particular advocacy. There are advocacy programs like that now occurring now, but we're strategic about how visibility is addressed and what the skills are. Yes, there could certainly be a pushback. I think that's working at a public university. funded as a public university, that will always be the case. And as a public scholar, we need to prepare for that.
Yeah, I would just add briefly that in terms of the students' interests in a broad array of issues that could be construed as mental health, or at least having mental health implications. I'm hearing both a kind of the need for support around kind of dealing with such issues, but also activism in addressing them. And I think of the People First movement for individuals with developmental disabilities, because the chapters of People First often will have a mix of sort of social and political content. And I think that idea of melding those two in a mutual aid support group, or a group of that sort that also has a trained facilitator might have promise. So yeah, thank you. Thumbs up. Okay. Yes, the sort of disconnected arm. We can see that much of you, Regina. So I want to thank the conference organizers for including us on the program. I want to thank Luis and Jose for a very thoughtful presentation that resonates deeply with me. And Brett, I really appreciate your thoughts about clinical community training. We should talk more about that sometime and compare notes. And Bruna, the perspective you bring from Italy is fascinating, and I hope we have a chance to talk about peer support at some point. We didn't just now. Yeah, thanks Annie and Martina for helping with the presentation, and clap, clap. Here we go.
Thank you to you all. Thank you. And well, we will see. Is Maria is making, well, I hope that we will have an opportunity to make the next time in presence physically, and not
That
only.
would be great. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, take care.